Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
So just something to look out for. Taking a look at our satellite imagery and seeing what's going on, and we'll take a look at what's going on up here where you can see Gamble, St. Lawrence Island. This is that frontal boundary. It's basically a cold front that's extending down through the Bering Strait. Snowy conditions associated with this front, as well as some windy conditions. So heavy snow along with blowing snow and blizzard type conditions are what you should expect overnight tonight into the morning hours. Taking a look at the loop again. South of the Aleutian Islands, you can see a large area of low pressure south of the chain, and basically this is the jet stream is coming on across, supporting these low pressure systems and bringing moisture and storms into the Gulf of Alaska as well. And taking a look at the satellite imagery over the state itself. Here's a frontal system and a low in the south of the Gulf of Alaska, and then in southeast Alaska there were some clouds today. This was what's left of a storm that had already gone through, and now you can see the next one coming on up into the picture. So while you'll have a small reprieve in the evening hours for southeast Alaska, this next system will be moving on into the picture, and that'll be bringing yet another shot of rainy weather for the Panhandle. Running that loop one more time, you can see over the south central region, Cook Inlet region, generally speaking, clear type conditions, although right in the vicinity of the Cook Inlet area, foggy conditions were prevalent today. Over much of the mainland up to the Arctic coast, as you can see, cloudy conditions. Taking a look at today's weather map, here's this low pressure system in the Gulf or south of the Gulf of Alaska that's going to be moving towards southeast Alaska, bringing with it another shot of rain for the Panhandle. Along the North Gulf Coast, basically from Kodiak Island to the North Gulf Coast to the northern Panhandle, here's what's left of the front that came on shore yesterday, and some scattered showers over the Kodiak Island area to the North Gulf Coast, northern Panhandle there, Yakutat area, and the northern inside water, showery type conditions. Some rain was being reported, and you're going to see some more again tonight. Foggy conditions were reported in the Copper River Basin, as well as some of the locations in the southern Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Here's the Arctic frontal boundary extending through the state of Alaska. Not a lot going on along the frontal boundary, but cloudy conditions. Here's the system that was pushing a front occlusion type cold front through the Bering Strait region. Snowy conditions, moderate to heavy snowfall, windy conditions, blizzard-like conditions. Windy and snowy conditions as well over that northwest Arctic coast, and blizzard-like conditions there as well. Taking a look at tonight's forecast, this cold front will continue to extend down through the Bering Strait. The occlusion was really more of a cold front, just misdrew it on the first map. Cold front through the Bering Strait, windy, snowy conditions, near blizzard conditions, especially in that Bering Strait region to the northwest Arctic coast. Much of the Arctic coast, though, is going to avoid any of the snow as that warm front is north of the coast, but it will be cloudy. Some scattered showers, snow showers in the Brooks Range area. Also in southwestern Alaska, you may see a scattered snow shower or two there as well. The low pressure system coming up into the northern Gulf of Alaska, with the associated front becoming more of a more potent low. Rain throughout the southern 2/3 of southeast Alaska, up into the northern Panhandle, up towards White Pass in that area. Snow mixing in with that rain, and in the pass itself, more than likely just all snow there. Taking a look further to the west, the Alaska Peninsula, generally cloudy conditions. You may see a isolated shower or two across the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutian Islands, but nothing really of consequence. Here's our system coming up south of the Aleutian Islands. Going to push some moisture on up to the Aleutian Islands themselves. Chance of some rain overnight over the central to western Aleutian Islands. By tomorrow, we expect low pressure in that northern Gulf of Alaska. The front basically washes out as it moved onshore, but a continued strong, moist push into the panhandle. Rain throughout southeast Alaska, potentially heavy at times. A mixture of rain and snow in the northern panhandle. Chance of some rain as you move on over towards the west, towards Prince William Sound, but generally expect cloudy conditions there. Breaks in the clouds to sunny conditions in the Copper River Basin on up into the Palmer Wasilla to the Anchorage area. Southwestern Alaska also expect sunny conditions tomorrow, and then in the eastern portions of the Tanana Valley, also some sunny conditions. A weak low pressure system over the central interior may produce some snow showers across that region. Cloudy conditions across the Arctic coastal area. Through the Bering Strait, the cold front does push through. Some snow showers can be expected on the back with this front and behind the front, but conditions are going to improve dramatically tomorrow through the Bering Strait, so those warnings should no longer be in effect then. Some snow showers across the northern Bering Sea. A mixture of rain and snow showers can be expected in the Pribilof Island region. And then across the Aleutian Islands themselves, a mixture of rain and snow early on in the day, becoming more rain late in the day over that central Aleutian Island area. Taking a look at the forecast now for Wednesday, we have this low pressure system, yet another one that's going to be in the northern Gulf of Alaska. The kind of the theme for southeast Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska is we're going to continue to see these low pressure systems coming up from the North Pacific associated with the main low pressure area south of the Aleutian Islands, spawning these lows that are going to be moving towards the northern Gulf of Alaska and keeping that moist onshore flow pattern going. Rainy conditions in southeast Alaska yet again on Wednesday. Behind the front that's going to be moving onshore, it will become more showery. Along the North Gulf Coast, cloudy conditions. There's a chance you may see some rain in that eastern Prince William Sound area, an outside chance there. Sunny conditions in the Copper River Basin, right on up to the eastern Tanana Valley. Sunny conditions across the Cook Inlet region, down to Bristol Bay, the inland portions of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and on up into the western interior. There should be cloudy conditions over that Seward Peninsula area and down through the Bering Strait and across the Bering Strait. You may see breaks in the clouds on Wednesday there. Along the Arctic coast, expect cloudy conditions with a chance of some snow basically along the entire coast as well as the north slopes of the Brooks Range. Out into the Bering Sea region, as you can see, low pressure is staying south of the Aleutian Islands, and expect generally cloudy, windy conditions, a chance that you may see some rain or showers, but generally speaking, dry conditions or not rainy conditions across the Aleutian Islands. Across the Bering Sea itself, expect some scattered snow shower activity basically in that eastern Bering Sea across the central to the western Bering Sea and even into the western Aleutian Islands. There's a chance that you may see a few snow showers there. Taking a look now at our temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska, generally in the low to mid 40s in the southern two-thirds of the panhandle to the mid 30s to upper 30s in the northern panhandle. Over towards the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, temperatures in the 30s across those areas, 20s as you get on it to the Cook Inlet region, low 30s up into the Susitna Valley. Copper River Basin, more winter-like temperatures in the single digits or near zero. As we move on up into the eastern interior, again, single-digit readings throughout much of the area, except for right along the lee side of the Alaska Range, a little bit warmer into the teens in some areas. Taking a look at temperatures up towards the Arctic coast, sub-zero readings throughout the entire Arctic coast until you get towards the northwest Arctic coast, where temperatures in the teens to single digits above zero. Same thing down towards the Kotzebue Sound area. Inland of Kotzebue Sound on the Seward Peninsula, temperatures in the minus teens there, minus single digits. As we move on down towards the Kuskokwim Valley, temperatures basically in the single digit range. Down towards south, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, temperatures in the teens to near zero as well in single digits. And as we move on over towards southwestern Alaska, Bristol Bay, temperatures in the teens, 20s along the lee side of the Aleutian Mountains, 20s and 30s across the Alaska Peninsula, 30s from the Pribilof Islands down towards the Unalaska area, and 30s and 40s along the Aleutian Islands themselves. Taking a look at our low temperature forecast for tonight, expect temperatures in southeast Alaska to be basically in the low 30s to low 40s. North Gulf Coast, temperatures in the 20s to 30s. Kodiak Island, though, will stay on the warm side in the mid to upper 30s there. Single-digit readings continuing in the Copper River Basin, temperatures dropping in the 20s in the Susitna Valley. Single-digit readings below zero over much of the interior, basically from the Alcan border right on over towards the Seward Peninsula. Up over the Arctic coast, temperatures are basically going to stay at about where they were at in the minus teens throughout much of the Arctic coast. Northwest Arctic coast, temperatures will drop below zero. Temperatures basically staying at about where they were for highs today, single digits above and below zero in the Kotzebue Sound. Same thing as you move on towards Norton Sound. Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, single digits. The Bristol Bay Area will see some cooling tonight in the teens and 20s. 30s along the Alaska Peninsula to the upper 20s. 30s across the Aleutian Islands, low 30s in the Pribilof Islands, and low to mid 30s out in the western Aleutian Islands. By tomorrow, highs in southeast Alaska in the mid 40s in the southern Panhandle, the upper 30s to mid to upper 30s in the northern Panhandle, upper 20s across much of the North Gulf Coast until you get down towards Homer, mid 30s there, low 40s in Kodiak Island, single digits in the Copper River Basin, single digits across much of the interior, single digits above and below zero along the Arctic coast, single digits over the Seward Peninsula area. We get to around 10 to the teens over southwestern Alaska to Bristol Bay, where we should see temperatures in the 20s and 30s there. 30s and 40s across the Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s in the Pribilof Islands, low 40s in the Unalaska area, and temperatures in the upper 30s throughout the remainder of the Aleutian Islands. For our flying weather tomorrow, southeast Alaska, expect for the most part marginal conditions. The southern Panhandle, you may see some IFR conditions, and then also on up into the Chilkoot and White Pass area, marginal to IFR conditions there. Marginal conditions along the North Gulf Coast, basically the Chugach Mountains south. Marginal conditions across Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, with some IFR conditions over the central Aleutian Islands, marginal conditions out over the western Aleutian Islands, and then across the Bering Sea, as you would expect with the winter-like conditions associated with that front there. IFR conditions from St. Matthew Island on up into the Bering Strait region. Marginal conditions across the Seward Peninsula. Marginal conditions basically across much of the Arctic coastal areas with some IFR conditions associated with that weak low pressure area over the central Brooks Range tomorrow for at least a short while. For our passes tomorrow, expect marginal conditions for Anaktuvik as well as Adding and Pass. And again, that's just with that low pressure system that's kind of pushing a weak trough or a front through. So marginal conditions becoming VFR late in the day. Taking a look at the Alaska Range passes, VFR conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as Rainy Pass and Windy Pass VFR there as well. Continuing along the Alaska Range, VFR conditions for Isabel Pass, as well as Mentasta Pass. Down to the Chugach Mountains, expect VFR conditions for Tonita Pass, but in Portage Pass, expect marginal conditions throughout the majority of the day tomorrow. Southeast Alaska and both Chilkoot and White Pass, expect IFR conditions for both the passes, especially with that mixture of rain and snow, likely all snow up in the passes themselves. Taking a look at our freezing levels for tomorrow. Freezing levels at the surface throughout the majority of the mainland, sloping to about 2,000 feet as you get into the southern Panhandle, about 1,000 to 2,000 feet across the Alaska Peninsula, and basically sloping down to the surface as you get out towards the western Aleutian Islands. For our icing tomorrow, expect some light, isolated, moderate icing, basically from your freezing level to about 12 to 15,000 feet throughout southeast Alaska, right on over towards the North Gulf Coast. We also expect some icing conditions out in the Aleutian Islands from your freezing level to about 11,000 feet there from basically the central Aleutian Islands out towards the western Aleutian Islands, out towards Shemya and Attu. Taking a look now at our jet stream for tomorrow. The jet stream starts off at about 150 knot jet south of the Kamchatka Peninsula, increases to about 165 knots as we move south of the Aleutian Islands, drops off to 80 knots coming up through the Gulf of Alaska, and then 60 knots over down along the Rocky Mountains themselves. Moving on down to the 9,000 foot level, expect basically 25 to 30 knot winds in the northern Panhandle to about 40 knots in the southern panhandle. Light and variable winds over much of the mainland, then over the northwest Arctic coastal areas and the Bering Strait with that low in front that's going through there, about 20 to 35 knot winds there. 30 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Bering Sea with about 25 to 35 knot winds as you go out along the Aleutian Islands themselves. Down to the 3,000 foot level in southeast Alaska, 55 knots down through that Dixon entrance area, 40 knots up to the northern panhandle, lighter winds along the North Gulf Coast there in Prince William Sound. 25 to 45 knot winds from Kodiak Island across the Alaska Peninsula, light winds across the majority of the mainland, light winds over the Arctic coast, even in the Bering Strait region, not very strong winds down to the surface there. About 35 to 40 knot winds across much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands as well. And for our turbulence tomorrow, expect some isolated moderate turbulence below 3,500 feet across the Aleutian Islands, widespread moderate below 2,000 feet over the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutian Islands, and then southeast Alaska, basically the same thing, widespread moderate below 2,000 feet in the southern panhandle, and below 3,500 feet isolated moderate throughout southeast Alaska. And that wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Cornfield. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to another edition of Hangar Flying. My guest this evening is Jay Baldwin. Jay is the owner of Alaska Cub Training Specialists and specializes in off-airport and survival training. Welcome to Hangar Flying, Jay.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
So give us a brief history of your start in aviation and also what your company does and how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, I'll give you a brief history, and it's sad but true. I started flying in 1971 in gliders. Got my first instructor rating in 75. Was in the military. I flew T-37s and T-33s, F-106s, ultimately F-16s on the fighter side. Took an airline job flying Boeing 727s and 747s. Ran a glider operation. Towed with some tail draggers, had some Cherokee Arrows and a bunch of other airplanes. I like to joke that I did a little bit of flying in lots of fields. Never flew a balloon or the space shuttle, but a little bit of dabbling everywhere in the middle. I moved to Alaska in 1997, and I'd almost been instructing 25 years then. I thought I knew a little bit about aviation and proceeded to wreck 2 Cubs within the next 5 years. And I had to admit to myself that, wow, maybe I didn't have all the answers. Maybe I had to re-examine everything I thought I knew about flying. And if I was going to continue to instruct and maybe even continue to fly in Alaska. And it's through that process of re-examination that we developed what we call survival flying. And we now teach that program not only to our clients that come to learn bush flying in Alaska, but to the state troopers, to people from all over the world that are interested in bush flying.
So can you teach judgment to, do you think, to people that don't have that experience? They come up here and want to fly a Super Cub, for instance, out in the bush, Alaska or whatever. Yeah,
I think one of the weaknesses of the current training that we do, or that has traditionally been used in the FAA and the practical test standards, is that a lot of times we let the instructor kind of direct a lot of the decision-making process. Our program virtually turns that upside down. When someone comes in on the very first day, we ask them, well, do you want to fly today? And we make them look outside and make some decisions with almost no flying experience whatsoever, perhaps. And on a rare occasion, we will, of course, trump that decision if it's a poor one. But generally speaking, we will let them, we'll go out there with an instructor and let them see why they made a poor decision. The point being that these types of decisions we only get 20 hours with our students, a dual. And so they need to have all the opportunity to make the good decisions while they're flight planning, while they're taxiing out. If they turn around and come back and say, you know what, I didn't realize it was those are the types of decisions we love to see.
So we just had a picture up on the screen. Maybe you can describe what that one is.
Yeah, that's just a on our tours, we train pilots. In this case, I trained a bunch of Israeli pilots, and we're on tour around Alaska, and this is over in the Katmai. These guys have all demonstrated to me that they know what to do in a Super Cub, and then consequently after a number of days we'll pack up 4 Cubs and go on I think this one was actually a 10-day tour around the state of Alaska. They get to fly and demonstrate their newfound skills, and I get to sit in the back seat and enjoy the ride.
So here's another interesting looking picture. Maybe you can describe what's happening here.
One of the things we find is the training programs very often don't address the fact that we, in Alaska, many of our greatest runways are very slanted. Beaches or bar ditches or some type of a slant to the terrain. And of course, down the Cook Inlet with our fabulous tides, 35, 40-foot switches, we have tons of beautiful places to land. However, it makes a huge difference, and this is one of the threats we want the people to recognize. It makes a huge difference whether there's an onshore breeze or an offshore breeze. An onshore breeze being your friend, and an offshore breeze being your worst nightmare. Here's a case where the client is practicing even though it's not much of an offshore breeze, they're practicing offshore technique by touching at the water's edge and then running up the beach with a slight turn to come to a stop at the top of the beach.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have. We're going to have Jay back on our next program to finish his story. But a safety tip, make sure to update your emergency locator transmitter by installing the newer 406 ELT, and remember to file a flight plan. Also, if you deviate from your route of flight, let flight service know. It just could save your life. So thanks for watching, and fly safe.
Welcome back, and now let's get started with our marine forecast for Southeast Alaska on Tuesday. For the southern inside waters and the middle inside waters there, expect 35 to 45 knot winds from the southeast. Winds initially in the Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area will be out of the north around 10 to 15 knots, becoming south 20 knots later in the day. Southern outside waters along the outer coastal areas, south to southeast winds 35 knots, and then along the east Gulf Coast, expect your winds to be out of the southeast at 30 knots. On Wednesday, the winds are going to still remain pretty strong in the southern panhandle. Now, during the day, there's going to be a dramatic drop-off in winds from like late Tuesday into Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, and then increasing Wednesday afternoon and evening up to these velocities again. South winds 30 knots again late in the afternoon up to the Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area. South winds 40 knots in the southern outside waters to 30 knots just off the coast of Sitka, with east winds 25 knots along that east Gulf Coast. For the south central region, expect your winds to be out of the north 15 knots in that Prince William Sound area, northeast 25 to 35 knots along the north Gulf Coast, northeast winds 25 knots across much of the Kodiak Island area with 20 knot winds in the Shelikof Strait, northeast winds 20 knots south of Calgan Island in the inlet with north winds 10 knots in the northern inlet. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday, northeast winds throughout the entire region, 15 knots in Prince William Sound to 20 knots as you move offshore of the Sound. Northeast winds 25 knots from the Barren Islands across Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, and the Augustine area. Northeast winds 25 knots south of Calgan Island in the inlet with northeast winds 10 knots in the northern Cook Inlet region. For the Alaska Peninsula on Tuesday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast across the entire area. 25 knots in Bristol Bay to 30 knots as we move over towards the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. 30 to 35 knots south of the peninsula. On Wednesday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast 30 knots across the entire region, including Bristol Bay. For the Aleutian Islands for Tuesday, expect your winds out of the northeast about 30 to 35 knots from Unalaska over towards Nikolsky and Atka. 35 knot northeast winds from Atka to Adak and the Amchitka area, and northeast winds 35 knots as you move on out towards the western Aleutian Islands. For Wednesday, expect the winds to remain out of the northeast about 35 to 40 knots over the eastern to eastern central Aleutian Islands. Northeast winds 35 knots over the central Aleutian Islands, and northeast winds 35 knots as you move on out towards the western Aleutian Islands. For our Bering Sea coastal waters for Tuesday, Expect northeast winds 20 to 25 knots in the Nunivak Island region, 30-knot northeasterly winds in the Pribilof Islands, north to northeast winds 25 knots from St. Lawrence Island down to the St. Matthew Island region. For Wednesday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast across the entire region, about 25 to 30 knots as well for the entire region. For our Arctic coastal waters, expect winds from Barrow east, expect winds east 10 to 15 knots, as well as over towards Point Lake, expect your winds out of the east at 20 knots. Excuse me, this is the wrong chart. The winds off the northwest Arctic coast are going to be out of the basically the west-northwest, about 15 to 20 knots. Let's see, here's Tuesday, and expect your winds out of the east about 20 to 25 knots, well actually 10 to 15 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters. Over the western Arctic coastal waters, forgive me, for some reason the maps didn't save properly for our Arctic coastal waters, but in this area outside Kotzebue Sound, the northwest Arctic coast, the winds are going to be out of the west-northwest about 10 to 15 knots. Barrow east about 10 to 15 knot winds out of the east. For a quick recap, for tonight's forecast, we do have that heavy snow warning in the Bering Strait region, as well as windy conditions. Near blizzard-type conditions can be expected there, as well over towards the northwest Arctic coast. Some scattered snow showers inland along in the Brooks Range area. Scattered snow showers over southwestern Alaska. We have this storm system moving on up towards southeast Alaska. Wet, windy conditions can be expected there, possibly mixed with snow in the northern panhandle. Taking a look at the forecast again for Tuesday. Southeast Alaska is going to stay rainy. Windy conditions are going to let up and then come back. They're going to diminish early in the day and then come back late in the day on Tuesday. And rainy conditions as well. And generally cloudy conditions along the North Gulf Coast with some breaks in the clouds as you move a little bit further inland. But we're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.